I'm Dr. Paul with Online Chiropractic Marketing Systems, and what I do is offer coaching, marketing, and consulting and training services for chiropractors so they can maximize their practice potential. In other words, increase their business to the maximum of their potential, really to increase the lifestyle and so they can pursue their dreams, lifestyle, and their passions. And I've opened 77 chiropractic offices in 20 states, seeing over 30,000 new patients a year, and donated over $500,000 to chiropractic. And what we're going to talk about today is the new patients opportunity lost. Chiropractors are always looking for new patients, and so we're going to talk about where there's a lot of opportunity and why. And a lot of times if you can't see opportunity, you'll never be able to act on it. And so this little exercise is meant to really show where there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I use this opportunity, and this is a major component of how I opened 77 offices in 20 states, seeing over 30,000 new patients a year. This is exactly some of the reasoning behind it. And essentially what we're showing here is how there's really unlimited new patients. But if you don't have the vision and you can't see it and you don't have the skill level, then you will be very limited. And so we're going to do a little review and then go into the core of this. And so what we're looking at is the total new patients, and I'm only going to talk about the circle of influence right here. So I'm only going to talk about new patient potential from the circle of influence. And the circle of influence is one of the best categories of new patients because of number one, because there's higher trust. And then number two is there's higher need. So we already know based on the S-curve of economics that only 8% of the population is utilizing chiropractic annually. Well, that's a small number. So you can, if you don't know anything else, then you can just multiply the number of people in your area times 8% and divide that by the chiropractors, and that's how many people are looking for chiropractors within your geographic radius. So that's a small number, but fortunately, the right side of that curve shows that 90 of the 92% who do not seek chiropractors, 75% of those people have back pain, neck pain, or headaches to some degree. In other words, they have a problem that chiropractic is really good at helping with, but they're not seeking chiropractic care. And a lot of that has to do with the negative perceptions and the bad marketing of chiropractic as a profession and how it's been branded. Chiropractors have branded themselves really bad. So and again, that has to do with just trying to be everything. And so when you try to be everything to everybody, you become nothing to everybody, and that's why it's a very, very small number. So when you look at the market size potential of new patients, we already know that the second leading cause of, this is just flat out research, second leading cause of new patients to your GP is from back pain. And we're only talking about one condition, back pain alone. So if you can go in your geographic radius of draw, which is only a 2 to 3 mile radius, depending on where you're at, go ahead and tally up all the number of GPs you have in that area, and then just imagine you can take the average GP number of new patients, and then imagine that being the second leading cause of the patients going into their offices. So you have all these patients that are going into these GP's offices all around you with back pain that are not calling you. And it's the same with the leading emergency room visits. It's the second leading cause to the emergency room is back pain. And back pain is the second leading workers' compensation injury. So we already know there's a tremendous amount of people who have this problem that we can help with, and that we're pretty good, if not the best, at helping with it, especially mechanical back pain. And so what we're going to pay a close attention to is the circle of influence category, and we're going to talk specifically about what the potential is with your spouse, children, or a circle of influence, and how does that relate. So when we look at, and we're going to call that introduction marketing, and I defined this earlier, introduction marketing, as, and there's really the 5 types of marketing, which is introduction, which is the best. You have the greatest opportunity, up to 75%. And then I talk about active referrals. You can get as much as 55% versus passive referrals. Active is actually not waiting, but actually creating them. You can actually create referrals by having a knowledge and a skill set instead of just waiting for it. And then the next category was leads, which is a much lower potential. So if you have a marketing program with leads, it's only potentially 15% versus cold calls at 1%. So immediately we want to start paying attention to where's the highest probability, and that's called the introduction market, your circle of influence. That's what that's called. So we're not even going to talk about cold calls, leads, active referrals, and passive referrals per se. We're going to talk about the circle of influence, what the opportunity is. And if we look at, and I'm just going to simplify this, and let's say that the average chiropractic office is seeing 10 new patients, and you can just extrapolate this number relative to where you're at, if it's more or less. But if we look at this number, what is the actual potential of number of new patients? It's 62 a month. 62 new patients a month. If you're averaging 10 new patients right now, you have the potential of 62 new patients a month. And I'm going to show you that right here. Now, how does that work? Well, I'll just walk through the math with you here. If you look at those 10 new patients, that comes out to 120 new patients a year. So we're going to take that 120 new patients a year number, and 87% of those people are either married or have a significant other. They have a spouse. So if we multiply that out, that's 104 potential new patients. Now, they are somewhere on that S curve. They're either an 8%er, or they're in that 92%er, at a 25, or they're a 75%er. Now, so we have 104 potential new patients from spouses. And then if we take the children, the average couple has 2.3 children. So if you take your 120 and multiply it times 2.3, you're at 276. So there's in that 1 year, you have 276 potential children with any type of problem you can help with. And then you have the circle of influence. So if the average person has a circle of influence of 7, that's the average. And circle of influence is where there's high emotional content. You care about them, they care about you, you know about them, they know about you. And that's typically the people under the same roof. If they live in the same roof, they probably care about each other, know about each other. And it includes mother, father, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, best friend, coworker. That's essentially the circle of influence. That you will know them and they will know you. You will know most of their problems. They'll know kind of your problems. And more importantly is you'll actually be willing to go out of your way to actually do something for those people, way more than somebody outside of your circle of influence. And that becomes very important when you're looking at new patients and referrals. So if we subtract out of the circle of influence that number minus the spouses, you're at 720. So when we add up the circle of influence and the spouse and the children, you take 720, 276, and 104, and you're roughly at 1,100 new patient potential in 1 year. And remember, this is only from seeing 10 new patients. So you're sitting in front of a potential of 1,100 people. So if we take those 1,100 people and subtract out the 8%, because we know statistically speaking, 8% of those people will be seeking chiropractic care in that calendar year. So that's 88 people roughly. So that's not a big number, but it is a number. It's something to pay attention to. So if we're looking at the new patient potential, those are the people who are actively looking. So it won't take as much to get those people. I mean, you do have to do some advertising to get more of that 88, but let's face it, 88 out of 1,100 is not a big number. So you certainly want to put the highest probability components in place to get that market. But when we subtract out that 88, and let's just round it to 100, and if we were at 1,100, we subtract out 100, that's roughly, we're at 1,000. So now, how does that 1,000 apply into the S-curve? We've got 1,000 people on the right side of that S-curve that are not looking for chiropractors. Well, what do we know about that S-curve of economics? Here's what we know. We know that 25% of those people do not have back pain, neck pain, or headaches. So we can subtract out those people. So that's 750 people. So out of that circle of influence, we got 750 potential high target market probability. In other words, there's a high trust, and to some degree, there's a need there somewhere. So we're in the highest absolute category of business. Now, the key is what do you do to get that business? That's what chiropractors generally don't know how to do. And that's how we were able to open 77 offices, 14 a year. It's because we knew exactly what to do and exactly what to say to get that business. And I'm going to share with you how important this is. So if you take 750 potential new patients, that's a high trust category, and have a need to some degree, and divide that by 12, that's 62 new patients a year. And these are not cold calls. These are not people down at the mall screening. These are your circle of influence. This is your patient base. This is your patient's spouse, mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, children. That's who this is, best friend. So there's a high potential category of business here. So how does this relate to the market? Well, let's go ahead and just a quick review here. Remember, when we talk about need, in other words, somebody has to have a need to spend time or money, to act. And we already talked about the primary, the reasons people will act are pain-based needs that are either primary physiological needs, secondary physiological needs, or their value system-based needs. It's one of those three factors that we've talked about extensively in the past. And then what will limit them from coming is the time or money. So here's what we know about those people, those 62 potential new patients a month. We already know there's a need here to some degree. How much we don't know, statistically speaking, but we also know that there's an obstacle here to some degree. Now, this is very important to be highly aware of how this works. Now, I'm going to use this as an example, and I'm going to call it the scale of new patient activation. In other words, are all these people just going to come in because you say come in? No, they're not. And so here's how it works. And if we can use this as an analogy, let's say, and this is the high need category to a low need. In other words, if there's no need to no need down here, we can we not agree they're not going to come in, they're not going to spend time or money if there's no need? And so the difference between here, the high need in here, is the difference it makes when they're going to come in. Now, the people who have high need, that's the 8%ers. Those are the people who already fit this category. Their need is greater than their obstacles, and that's why they're willing to pick up the phone and call and do something totally different in their life, as opposed to go to work and cook or take care of their kids or go to sporting events or whatever, go to the arts, whatever. So if it's a high need category, what are we really talking about? This is really the 8%. What are we really talking about here? The no need. That's the 25% of the 92%. So somewhere in the middle is the activation. What does that mean? That's when they come in as a new patient. That's the 62 that I'm talking about right here. That's that 62 number right there. 62 new patients a month. So somewhere in this category, these people have a need to some degree, but they also have obstacles. So it's a relationship between their perception of their need, how it's affecting their primary or secondary primary physiological needs, limiting or restricting their primary physiological needs or their secondary physiological needs, or their value system. So we know to some degree that that will affect need. And I'm just going to use as an arbitrary number here a scale 1 to 10. And we're going to say 10 is the number that is the highest to actually act, and 0 or 1 is the lowest. So having said that, when we come back and look at this scale, we're going to go ahead and apply this scale to that category, that 62%. Remember, these are people who are not looking, but they have a problem. So what is the formula? How does this work? Well, here's the considerations of how it works. This is what happens to get this business right here. Now, what we're looking at is the need is the core. In other words, the primary motivation is always the perceived need relative to their obstacles, relative to the amount of trust. That's what always is the core. And so remember what we're talking about here. We've already identified a potential of 62 potential new patients if you're only seeing 10 new patients a month right now. So you can double this number if you're seeing 20. If you're seeing 15, half it. If you're seeing only 5, then you can do the math accordingly. So when we come back, we're going to pay a lot of attention to this factor right here, to this scale, This scale is imperative for you to kind of wrap your mind around, because everybody fits into these categories. Every time you see somebody on the street, in your waiting room, anybody, they fit into one of these categories I'm talking about. And how well you understand this is how well you'll know what to do. Is it an 8%er? Well, I'm gonna think and do certain things if it's an 8%er. If it's a 92%er, I'm gonna think and do certain ways. I'm gonna have a certain way of thinking. So we know the core motivation, there always has to be need, and the need has to be greater than the obstacle. Now we're gonna also say, flat out, if there's no trust, then you're not going to get the business anyway. If there's a need or obstacles involved. If the obstacles are too high for the need, they're not going to act. They're not going to act. If there's no need, they're not going to act. Or if the need is lower than the obstacles, they're not going to act. All of these, you have to be highly aware, all of these are levers. And the more skill and knowledge you have, you're going to be able to control these levers. And the more skill and knowledge you have, and the more you can control need, in other words, establish need, and minimize obstacles, the greater your chance of getting this business. Now, if you don't have the knowledge or skill to do that, you will not be able to access any of these 62 potential new patients, because they are not the 8% that it's looking. This is where there's huge opportunity, but also huge opportunity lost if you don't have the knowledge or skill to do this. So here's what happens is these are the factors to consider on whether or not where the person's going to be, higher or lower. And let's just say this represents the 5 mark. Let's say at the 5 mark they act. Anything that's a 5 or greater, and if their obstacles are 5 or lower. Let's say that is the arbitrary number at which we can actually get them to act and become a new patient. Okay? So having said that, first of all, we need to agree that not everybody is in this category. What percentage is in a high category? It's a low percentage. What category is in this category? Well, that's a low percentage. That's only 25 of the 75%. So where's the masses of the people? That's right in the middle. This is where the masses of the people are with back pain, neck pain, or headaches. It's right in the middle. It's exactly what we're talking about right here. That's where there's huge opportunity. And this is how it works. So if you can affect need and get the need 5 or greater and the obstacles 5 or lower, and we're going to say that the trust category is there. So we're going to actually do something unique with the trust category. We're going to say if the trust category is not there, you don't have much of a chance at all if you know how to establish a need or eliminate obstacles. It's not going to matter. So let's just throw away the trust category. If there's no trust, there's no potential business there. You move on. You go to the next potential business. So let's just put that in its proper perspective. Are we going to spend our time and energy trying to affect trust in somebody who doesn't trust chiropractic? There's no way you have the time or energy to try to affect their trust. There's no way. Trust, that takes a little bit of time and effort. So these are in actuality the 2 areas. Now what I'm doing is I'm harboring the trust category right off. In other words, I'm going to use this to my advantage. And how am I doing that? Because I'm only talking about the introduction people right now anyway. So I already am going to have some third-party trust because of the category I'm talking to. Now, how is this going to affect if I know how to affect these levers? Well, if I can get, like I said, if I can get the 5, and we're going to say 5 or greater on the need scale, combined with a 5 or lower with the obstacle scale, that will get them to act. That's what will happen. Now, what are some other factors? Let's say that they're a let's say their need is a 7. In other words, there's a pretty high need, but their obstacles are a 9. That won't get it either. That will not get it either, because that will stop them from acting. Let's say that the need is a 3 and the obstacles are a 3. That's not going to do it. There's enough there to stop them. And generally, when we talk about obstacles, we're generally talking about time or money, primarily money. So this ratio is absolutely important to understand the need. And so when you understand, and we're going to teach this, This is called educational sales. The educational sales can affect all 3 of these. Now, advertising generally will only affect the obstacles. So if I come over here and let's say they're on a scale of, they're 5, but money's the issue. But we help to minimize or eliminate the barrier. It's called the barrier to entry. In other words, we use advertising to lower an obstacle. And the obstacle we're going to target to lower that's limiting them from moving forward and acting is money. So let's say we have a way of communicating to help minimize that barrier to entry to get them to act, to come in. Yes, then we'll get them as a new patient. But will always lowering the barrier to entry, will that always do it? No. You guys have been out there before in chiropractic college and maybe given away a free exam or x-ray, and how many people did not participate or take advantage of it? Because you were only dealing with the obstacles. You did not impact need. That's why it didn't work. So these 2 relationships, so need versus obstacles, highly important. Now, that's advertising. Now, if I do educational sales, what if I knew how to establish the need? In other words, communicate with that person to where they realize that it's definitely limiting or restricting a primary physiological need. What if I can take that to their awareness level, to a higher consciousness level? The need will go up. They may be a 3. It may take them from a 3 to a 6. And if their obstacle was a 5, they're coming in. If I did that alone, they're coming in. Now, what if I knew how to establish the need and take it to a 6 from a 3, and let's say the obstacles were a 7? They're not coming in. Unless I can take the need, let's say I take the need from a 4 to a 6, and I take the obstacles from a 7 to a 5. So now the need is a 6 and the obstacles are a 5. Yes, they're coming in. Now, that's educational sales. Advertising will not do what I just said. Advertising affects obstacles primarily. It helps to lower the barrier to entry. Educational sales helps to establish need, minimize obstacles, and to a large degree can affect trust also. So it can definitely affect all of these ratios. And that has a significant impact in all this massive amount of people right here in the middle. All of these 62 new patients a month. Now remember, all of these 62 new patients, they're not scattered in one spot. They're all not 5s. Some of them might be a 7. Some of them might be a 3. Some of them may have obstacles that are an 8. Some of them may have obstacles that are a 4. They're all variable on the scale. Their relative need relative to their obstacles. We do know this. Their obstacles relative to their need is higher because they're not seeking chiropractic care. So you, to be able to change, you have to be able to communicate to change that. And that's called educational sales. So they are somewhere on the scale. And you got to kind of see that. Every person you see, go to McDonald's, go to lunch, look around that room. Every one of those people fit into the S curve with back pain, neck pain, or headaches. Either 8% of them are going to see a chiropractor in the next year or look. 92% of them are not. 25% of those people are not going to have a problem. 75% of those people will to some degree. And this is exactly the inhibiting or limiting factors of exactly how it works. Now, how much you know how to control this is going to depend on your knowledge and skill level. And of course, the more knowledge and skill level, you're going to be able to apply it to this category right here of 62 potential new patients a month. And if you're terrible at it, You can be terrible at 62 and get 10 or 20 or 30%, get 2, 4, 6, 8 new patients if you're terrible at it. Now, if you're a black belt at educational sales, you'll get 75% of those people. In other words, way more business than you can physically handle. That's the difference it makes. So that's the relationship of need to obstacles. Now, what are some other factors? What are the secondary factors? Now, the most important factors I just talked about were the need and obstacle. That is the absolute core of everything. Now, how does the secondary factors relate into this? Well, here are the secondary factors: the demographics, the geographics, the psychographic barriers, the vehicle of delivery, the gateways, your unique segment position, your message. Those are the secondary factors. So what happens when, and let's just say this person has a need of, say, 6, and their obstacles are a 4. In other words, they are in the exact position to come in. But let's throw a wrench into the equation. Let's say the demographics are wrong. It's not the demographic profile who would typically see a chiropractic patient on their own. And so you have to be aware of who the highest probability of demographics are to spend your time, energy, and money into those categories. There's certain age groups, there's certain genders, there's certain socioeconomics that are, there's basically 7 different categories in demographics, from age, sex, marital status, familial status, occupation, income. There's these categories that are higher probability. Now, guess what happens when you don't pay attention to those? And these are real to these people. And you're trying to force your message on these people who, let's say the person's 30 years old and they have 30 years of a belief system, and you're going to try to impose your message on them to try to get them to change a belief system, their demographics, who they are. Well, that's why 8 out of 11 businesses go bankrupt. Instead of knowing this and be able to access markets with high utilization, it's trying to force and impose things on people. And that doesn't work very well. So so what if our demographics were not right? What if we had this category here of the need was a 6 and the obstacles were a 4, but demographically, it's a high category of demographics that does not seek chiropractic care? We got a problem. We have a big problem. Let's go to geographics. Let's say the same thing. Let's say they're a 6, the need. In other words, they definitely have the need to come in. The obstacles are definitely lower. But your geographic radius of draw, let's say, is 3 miles. And this person lives 7 miles away. What's the likelihood of them now coming in? It is significantly decreased. Now, maybe your 80% geographic radius might be 3 miles. If they were, let's say they were 3 or 4 miles. If the need was higher, they would come in. But the further away they are, the higher the need has to be. So the further away you go out of your geographic radius of draw, the harder it's going to be to get business, even if you eliminate obstacles. So let's say if they have a high need at 8, and you eliminate the time and money obstacle with your marketing or advertising, and your radius of draw is 3 miles, but they live 15 miles away. It's not going to work.